Hey everybody, welcome back to NeuroSciQ, the best place on YouTube to increase your neuroscience IQ. Today we are joined by Jason Sherwin from deCervo. deCervo is a company that uses neuroscience to help improve your decision making. So sit tight, stay tuned, let's roll the intro. Welcome to the channel, Jason. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into neuroscience and maybe some of your other interests?
Sure. Yeah. I have a confession to make here. I didn't actually study neuroscience at all. I don't have a degree in it. I got into this field because of an interest that I developed towards the second half of my doctoral studies in aerospace engineering. And my undergrad was in physics. I also studied music, which is relevant for later in the story. And when I was towards the part of your PhD, when you're figuring out what are you going to write your PhD on, I had a choice between one path in aerospace engineering, which was about how to deflect asteroids from hitting the Earth and finding them. The other path was how to design things using more of a biological approach to algorithms and ways of computing stuff. Guess which one I took? So planetary defense, I left to Elon Musk and other people for now. And I got more into, I was really interested in, how the brain works, how it does things. And my PhD thesis kind of started me in this trajectory. After finishing my PhD in aerospace, I wanted to learn more about the brain and how it worked. And so I just started applying to postdoc positions anywhere that would take me. And I was lucky enough to land at Columbia University with a professor named Paul Scheide. His name is spelled S-A-J-D-A, so most people kind of see him as Sajda, but it's Scheide. And his lab, the Laboratory for Intelligent Imaging and Neural Computing, looked at how humans, people, make rapid decisions. So what they see, what they hear. When I got there, I was coming in as, completely unaware of really the background of using oddball tasks, as they're called in neuroscience. For colloquial speak, that means beeps and boops, or visual oddball tasks, which colloquial speak is red circles and green circles. And I thought, like, this isn't how the world works. And so I said, let's do something like those oddball experiments, but do it with something that's more like what we hear on a normal basis. So coming from the music background, see, I told you that would be important. I thought, how about we do something with music? And how about we insert what sounds like a mistake at a particular moment into a recording, and then compare it to what happens when there's no mistake, and see if the brain error detection system picks this up, kind of like how it does in an oddball response, sort of. And so that was really the basis for looking at how musical experts' brains hear things differently than non-musicians. And when I started doing that kind of work in the lab, it was kind of, over here from where everybody else was in the lab at the moment. That's kind of a story of my life. And but then Jordan, who's the other founder of deCervo, he was doing research on the more traditional beeps and boops and red circles, green circles, but using MRI. And I was just using lowly EEG at the time. And Jordan and I would occasionally talk about sports. He's a Yankees fan. He's a New Yorker. I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, being from Chicago. And, so we'd trade barbs about the Yankees and the Cubs at times. And then one day he said, after I presented on some of this work about the musicians and non-musicians, he said, how about we do this in sports? And funny story is that at the time I thought, like, well, maybe, but we started doing it. We thought about doing it in golf to start, but baseball became a much easier, technically speaking, route to go on because you had a stimulus that you could program to simulate on a computer pretty easily. And you could modify that stimulus with a lot more control than you could like taking videos of people with their golf swings. So it gave us a really nice parametric basis to design an experiment for making different types of pitch trajectories and then grading how well the participants of the study would recognize these pitches. And then when they got them right, when they got them wrong, when they were recognizing curveballs versus fastballs, we could actually use the same methods that we were using to classify performance at recognizing wrong notes and right notes. We could use that same method to classify brain response for fastballs and curveballs, or for corrects and incorrects. And so that was really the basis. It really grew out from there into getting into how we measure with MRI, what we're measuring structurally, functionally. We did a bunch of like network type analyses, looking at how the related activity in different parts of the brain before the pitch came was actually influencing what was happening, and right when the pitch came. And that was really the basis for us to know what's going on under the hood for these types of high stakes decisions, to come up with deCervo as a way of doing this in an applied sense. Academia, it's about finding new knowledge. Industry, it's about applying that knowledge. And so we took the kind of broad approach of saying, let's improve decisions in high stakes environments. This could be baseball, that could be, hockey you see over here, football you see over there, football in the rest of the world you see right behind me there. And so that always confuses people when I'm talking outside the US. And tennis, we can talk about later, is actually something newly that we're getting into. So that's really kind of the quickest version of how we got from there to here. And that's really where deCervo came from.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know you mentioned the background you have in music. I have a bit of a musical background too. So I'm interested to know, in your research that you did comparing music and musicians versus non-musicians, and then now the research that you've been doing with sports, do you see any parallels between experts versus non-experts in both fields? In general, does it seem maybe like practice in one field might change neural signatures?
Yeah, the short version is that whatever the processing stream is, like the sensory processing, so like for musicians, it's auditory. For hitters, it's mostly visual. Whatever, information processing stream is relevant to that task, that information processing stream we see is very tightly connected to movement, right? And so that's the kind of the shorthand, I think, similarity between the two. So like, for instance, with the baseball players, it was about simultaneous activation between their, or strong connection between their motor areas and their between their motor areas and their visual areas. So fusiform gyrus, I think, was talked about in the performance cortex book. MT for movement, so those kind of areas had to have really tight connection in order to facilitate the quick decisions that they make when fastball's coming towards you at like 90 miles an hour. And musicians, on the other hand, we were seeing with them that there was a strong indication that when they heard a mistake, let's say, now this is with EEG that we did with the musicians. So we had to do source reconstruction, and which is always, it's not perfect, but so it's not as precise as what we were able to do with MRI. So we're only mostly looking at like the cortical level, so closer to the scalp. And even with there, we were seeing that this strong source of difference between our musicians and non-musicians was located over the motor cortex, but lateralized to the side of the brain that would control, these were all string players, that would control their fret hand. So their fret hand and arm. So it was an indicator to us that we were, picking up on a circuit that was getting activated by there being this mistake, because, what we hypothesized was going on is that the musicians are predicting what's going to happen next in the piece. And that prediction is being driven by what they hear, but also their memory for what they've played before. It was a piece that like every cellist had played. And so we kind of think what was happening is that we were listening in on that cortical level to the error detection, but manifested on the physical, more movement side of the brain.
And yeah, I remember someone was telling me, I forget what the reference was, but there was some sort of scientific study that found that musicians, or even regular people, when they hear a song on the radio, the song is actually playing a second ahead of what you're actually hearing from memory in your brain. And I guess when the note comes that's unexpected, your brain says, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like what my brain is playing in my head. And I guess that's where the kind of aha moment happens for the experts, is that they're able to detect that much faster, it sounds like.
Yeah, they were. It was when we first piloted this, we just did it with conscious people, so they weren't musicians. And then we just wanted to see first, is there an error detection kind of signature there that we can find? So we, first pioneered it with, more like traditional pop songs. So one of the ones that we did a lot of experiments on was "Eye of the Tiger" by Survivor. So every time now that I hear that song on the radio, I will think of where the key changes were on this, because I have heard that song so many times with the key going down a half step or up a half step, but then when we found with, I won't say Joe Schmoes, but, non-musicians, that they had some signature telling us, when they noticed the change. When we now did that with musicians, and when we did it with musicians, we made sure to do it with musicians who were listening to the instrument they played. And so we did the Bach cello suites for that. And kind of a famous one that you hear on like Lexus commercials and stuff like that. It's the G major prelude. So it was a chance that non-musicians would, recognize it enough too. With the musicians, we were seeing that their deflection in terms of like how we classified the data for, key changes and non-key changes, they were recognizing that change quicker, and they were having a stronger response across their brain. So that's kind of what was our first clue to then go in and look at what is the driver of this difference. And that's how we got, later to that result about the motor cortex really driving, a good amount of that activity.
And I guess just for the audience tuning in that may be not as familiar with deCervo. So let me know if I summarize this correctly, but hitting a baseball is one of the hardest things you can do in the world. You have about 400 milliseconds to swing from the time that the ball leaves the pitcher's hand. And it sounds like half of that is really devoted to your musculoskeletal system doing the action of swinging. So you're only left with about 200 milliseconds to decide how you're going to make that swing. And I guess the theory is that if you can somehow, what I understand you guys discovered was that in really good hitters that have a high hitting percentage, there's a specific neural signal that you're able to capture using EEG that almost tells that hitter that this is a bad pitch, don't swing here. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that's what the difference is between a good hitter and perhaps an average hitter. Is that, am I describing the technology correctly?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of signatures that we saw where, and it really depends on what's available to you to measure. Like one of the challenges that we've had with professional and college baseball and sports in general is that, you know, forget about MRI. I mean, like MRI is just way too expensive to do, not just in dollars, which it is, but in terms of like time and flow and logistics and all that kind of stuff. It's very hard. Like, so to do it when we did it with college players at Columbia was really, I mean, in hindsight, it was quite an achievement logistically to get all those players to do it, and then to get age and gender matched, you know, controls was a little easier, but still, you know, college students can be difficult sometimes. But because we were able to have those two cohorts there, we were able to look at the differences on, you know, on an EEG level, on an MRI level, and you know, you have the problem of multiple comparisons to deal with, right? So you know, you could think you're finding signal, but you're really not. And so, but we were very careful with all that, all those kind of considerations, to, you know, really zero in on what are the, you know, the signatures that we see on a MRI level, on an EEG level, and we did them simultaneously, recording EEG in the MRI, which is really not hard to do because of Faraday's law, or not easy to do because of Faraday's law. And so we were able to see that there were these signatures for what separated our college players and our non-playing college you know, students. Now as we started, you know, applying this in real life situations, we started also seeing that some of those differences we were seeing were not just chalked up to the ability of the player against other players. It was more about like their kind of, I think, primedness to, you know, be ready to swing at a pitch. And so like one of the biggest, I think, you know, findings from when we first did this work was that there was a much stronger signal for the players to do an inhibition, to do a no-go, to stop, right? And we, you know, we thought at the time, if you just, you know, you got your two groups and you say these are the players and these are the non-players, and the players are better than the non-players. We've measured that. And then we also see that the players have this strong inhibition response and the players don't. We'd say, well, that's an indicator of expertise, right? Not really, because, you know, it's more an indication of the fact that they are so primed to swing, right? And so, and much more so than someone who's not a player. It's just kind of what, you know, a hitting philosophy. So we had to, you know, really take a look as we started doing more players using what became uHIT, which is our baseball and softball product, is we had to look at what are the most strong indicators of what actually translates out to the field, right? Is it that they're great at taking pitches, or is it that they are, you know, better at just knowing when to take and when to go, right? And how quickly they do that too. And so what we started to have to do was devise not so much a way of measuring more and more of these differences, but instead measuring and then giving them a way to improve the various metrics that we saw separated the players and the non-players. You know, so those really easy indicators to tell you these people can do it and those people can't, right? Or these people do it much faster than those people. And some of the neural indicators we think of, right, about like what does this person have to do in order to be able to, you know, not swing at pitches out of the zone? Well, they have to have some kind of inhibition signal that's going to stop them, right? You know, so those are I think the guidelines that we used for taking the next step of applying this in the real world, because I think that story about the inhibition signal is a good difference from what you study in an academic setting. And, you know, it makes perfect sense. These are my two groups. They're different in terms of ability. This, you know, measurement I've taken looks like the big differentiator between the two. But then when you get out into not just looking at players and non-players, but you're looking at these types of players versus those types of players, that signal is shared to some degree amongst all of them, right? And the ones that are better at taking, you know, bad pitches, they have that stronger signal in general. But it's not as easy to routinely collect that as it was in a, in a more traditional experimental setting. So what we have to do is rely on the type of data that we can collect, which is generally done with a phone, right? So it makes the analysis much more centered on the behavioral side of things rather than what's going on at an accompanying brain level. But we know what to expect when the behavioral is being collected, right? So it's not like we're just coming up with a video game that just, like Tetris, just gets harder every level by some simple algorithm, some kind of stepwise algorithm. It's based off of what we know is simultaneously happening on the neural side and what skills or circuits mediate those skills we'd have to improve for that given player.
All right, let's dig into this a bit then. So when you go out to a team with uHIT, are you guys helping the players that are maybe not so good get to that level of an expert player based off their neural signals that you connect? Like, how's it work?
Yeah, that's pretty much. I mean, they don't call them not so good players. They're usually they're usually younger players, or so like in Major League Baseball, for instance, right? When we first started Major League Baseball, our first 2 days. Well, no, it was the first day because it felt like 2 days because it went from like 6 a.m. till like 10 p.m. But it was with the LA Dodgers. And they gave us a swath of players from like some major leaguers, some minor leaguers, some guys who would become major leaguers, some guys who would never become major leaguers, because they wanted to see kind of like, how everyone did, right? And over time, we started to see a lot more minor leaguers than we did major leaguers. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that major leaguers, for the most part, they've got their philosophy, their approach, their style of doing things. And to get involved in that is very difficult, not just from the team management side, but from the player side themselves. They have this philosophy like, I got here based on how I know how to do this, and I don't want to mess it up, right? Okay. And so, but with developing players, we have a lot more bandwidth. We have a lot more leeway. So that's really where deCervo started its focus in baseball at the professional level, right? And so as we developed uHIT, because we used to just go by deCervo, but we needed to separate baseball from the other products. So when uHIT started being developed, we were primarily having uHIT being used kind of like a tool to simulate what it's like to get pitches and just you grade their accuracy pitch by pitch. And they could put in the different types of pitchers they were going to face and whatnot. So over time, though, we started seeing that these developing players, they didn't want just like a measurement that said you're 50% or you're 75% or you stink and you're great. They wanted something that said like, this is where you are now. This is where the average is, or this is where the maximum is, or we can get you here. Or how are we going to get you there? And so that's where we really then started taking the next step over the last couple of years to build in an automatic coach. So it's Coach Hewitt from uHIT, that's his name. So Coach Hewitt walks the players through an assessment when they start, and it's based off of what our assessments were when our paradigm, right, in neuroscience speak, it's based off of what our paradigm was when we did the original experiments on this with experts and novices. And but it's simplified down to the phone, right? It's fewer trials, right? And then we give them a customized plan to follow, right? That's set up, kind of like the innings of a baseball game, 9 innings, right? Each inning gets a little harder than the previous, but specifically addressing these particular skills that we measured via the behavioral data, right? And then when they finish that, it takes the assessment and their latest data and makes a new round for them. And so it continually feeds them in terms of ways of addressing their weaknesses, but also building on their strengths. And that's something that's actually, I think, important to highlight too with this, especially for development players, is that we have to be mindful of the balance between challenging the player and giving them something a little easier, right? So you don't want the task. It's just like in neuroscience. You don't want to have the task be way too hard in a paradigm so that your subjects just are zoning out, right? So we had to design it in such a way so that we could keep that, sustained attention, because there's so many other things demanding their attention. You don't have the luxury of just closing the door to the lab and say, and having them turn off their cell phone. They're on their phone, right? So they might be getting text messages or Snapchat notifications or whatever. And so we have to think of ways of getting them bought in to keep doing it. And that's really important for the developing players, right? Because they need to be seeing that they're making progress with this. But we also need to be able to have a true reassessment of how they're doing too, which may not be very comfortable for them to see at times, right? So that's a really important aspect, I think, that started. I think the pizzazz of working with Major League is really neat, but the application of it really was to the minor league players. And since we started doing that was 2015. Spring training was our first spring training, and since then, I mean, I can say we've worked with some players who are MVP All-Stars, World Series MVPs, and now a couple of prospects that we really worked with over a couple of seasons who are now at the Major League and doing great. So it's neat to see how some of the stuff that we did was part of that, right? And I think something you may have seen in the performance cortex was how Major League Baseball was interested in this, but still a little skeptical about it all. And so we have endeavored as scientists for years to figure out ways of doing really good control experiments on this, right? Like, how do you say that this guy became in a trade for Paul Goldschmidt because he used uHIT, right? Well, it happened just after he had a great hitting year and was using uHIT all the time, but they could say, I don't know, he changed his jock strap more than once. I don't know, who knows if it was uHIT, right? And so, we run into that all the time. And so we've, endeavored to make, more and more precise control experiments, mindful of the constraints we have in terms of how much compliance wiggle room there really is for the players. And so that's actually the basis of a project we're doing now with the Army, where we've worked with the Army for the last few years. They're interested in not baseball. They're not interested in national pastime. They're interested in national defense. But one of the reasons they're interested in national pastime for national defense is that it's about simulating training, right? To then see, like, will that affect real life performance? And so that's something we're using uHIT for actually right now. And so we're testing ways of doing, like, how do you do a sham condition without people thinking they're getting the sham, right? Or how do you, maybe give them one type of a training algorithm versus another one, and then do a comparison between the two. And, when compliance rates are, dropping off, how do you, keep sample size and stuff like that? So those are the types of things that we're, doing right now. And it's all driven by the fact that, the Major League level guys, the big time All-Stars who haven't used uHIT already, we're not going to touch them. We're mostly going to touch the developing players. We're mostly going to touch college has been a major area of activity for us, and particularly youth players. And with the custom training, uHIT's custom training that we've seen recently, where we drive it with a little bit of an algorithm based on their assessment, we're getting the direct feedback now from players, from their parents, from their coaches, that they're feeling like they're seeing a difference up at the plate. And that goes beyond anything you can speak to data-wise, because, like, we've been measuring this stuff up the wazoo for years at this point, right? And in some cases, it doesn't really matter, right? What matters is, does the hitter think it's making an impact? And in addition to the data, right? But that's something we're starting to see now with custom training, and that's really exciting. And that's particularly for development players.
Amazing. Good for you guys.
Yeah, I think this, I tried to kind of summarize it for my group while I was reading your guys' story. You hear this phrase, you miss 100% of shots you don't take, but I think I kind of took a step back and looked at success differently after I kind of wrapped my head around what deCervo was doing, and I wonder if a better way to kind of summarize success is um, real experts know what shots not to take and not waste time on things that may not be fruitful or swing at bad pitches. And so it's not actually, sometimes success is not doing more, it's actually having the wisdom to know when to do less. You think that's a kind of a fair summary of what expert decision making is about?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in hitting, going back to hitting, and we could talk about tennis actually with this too, because with hitting, there's still an overriding philosophy of more repetitions the better, right? And that was kind of our initial entree really to baseball. Is they thought, well, this is like MLB The Show, but the pitchers I'm seeing, right? The video game, right? So it's give me repetitions. But we were, obviously we were doing something a little more sophisticated than that, but that's not the way our users saw it in the beginning. But what we saw over time was that, there was another selling point really, and that's that if you are not going after bad pitches, right, you are swinging less and you are injury prone less, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's more anecdotal than, like we did a rigorous study on it, but just think about it in terms of like wear and tear on the body, rather than taking 100 hacks in BP batting practice off of, 50-mile-an-hour pitches that are all in the strike zone, right? Rather than doing that, you train your eyes up and your motor system connected to your vision system on what are the types of pitches you're going to see that day, right? And then, I mean, when you are a professional hitter, whether it's major league or minor league, you've been swinging a bat for a long time. No one has to like teach you how to swing again, right? And so, it doesn't take more than a few swings to remember how to do it. Just like kind of when you get up out of bed in the morning, it takes you a few steps to remember how to walk to the bathroom or the closet or whatever, right? And so what we're really trying to encourage in baseball is that when you are taking fewer swings at bad pitches, you're going to be less injury prone. And injuries are like the boogeyman really for everyone in baseball, especially they're highly valued athletes. Like we have on deCervo's YouTube channel, we do a series called the uHIT Academy. And so we do these uHIT Academy seminars where we talk to coaches and players at, college level, travel ball level, major league level, minor league level. And we were talking to two former major league players, Hal Morris, who was on the Reds when they won the World Series in the 90s, and Brendan Harris, who used to be in a couple of organizations, one of which was the Cubs. And we talked about how, they're kind of like agents now for players. And they talked about, how disastrous injuries are, especially for the bottom line of their agency as it's kind of working. And so one of the things that we're trying to get across with uHIT is that it's a way of getting the reps, right? But getting like targeted reps where you get feedback about like what you're seeing and what you're not seeing and how to see it better. But not getting that kind of like injury sustainment or injury possibility or, just like strain on the body from actually swinging so much. So I'd say that's one area where this applies. Pivoting over to tennis. Now, deCervo hasn't done anything in tennis yet. But just this week, actually, we signed our first deal with an academy in Europe that is going to be developing with us, kind of like uHIT for tennis, right? And in tennis, it's a little bit of a different procedure game, right? You're not just standing stationary. It's not always from the same release point. You've got the ad and the other side of the box to deal with. And so there are, and then also as volleys go back and forth, if you are misreading your opponent's shots, you're going to try to overcompensate for that by, to just, every shot. And so I've watched, one time I was in Sweden during the Open, during the women's Swedish Open. And I went to the final, and I remember watching in the final the one who lost, after, as she was getting more and more tired, she was misjudging more and more shots from her opponent, and then she'd overexert more, and then she'd misjudge more, and then she'd overexert more, and then miss even more. And so it was like this I call it like the vortex, right? It was just like, she's just like this down the toilet. And that's really something that is driven by your recognition of, what's a shot to go for and what's a shot just to let go, right? And how to conserve your energy and apply your physical energy more appropriately. As I grew up in Chicago in the 90s, we had the benefit of watching the Bulls and Michael Jordan, destroy the NBA. And so, and at the time, it was very exciting. Winning all the time, you just thought that's the way basketball was. And now when I go back and watch some games, especially Michael Jordan, he was a great athlete. There's no question about it. But he was also a great brain athlete. We talked about performance cortex, the athletic genius. He would look at all these cues of his defenders to realize where their weight was going, how he could play off of them, how he could confuse them. And that's something that makes a good athlete an incredible athlete, because they're able to see these types of patterns. And Wayne Gretzky talks about that too. He wasn't the fastest. He couldn't always jump the highest off of his skates, but he could see where things were going, so he could apply what he could do physically in the most efficient way on the ice to be effective.
Yeah, for sure. You have to be. Go ahead, Vivius.
No, I'm a big tennis fan, and I'm glad that you're expanding in the tennis space, because I have 2 young kids that I'm hoping will play professionally. But that what comes to mind is Pete Sampras. He was one of my idols growing up, and the funny thing about Pete Sampras is you'd watch him play, and no matter who he played, it was kind of the set would go 1-all, 2-all, 3-all, 4-all, and you're like, this guy, he's not that good. But I remember whenever it got to 4-all, he almost took it to the next level. I think he had that kind of score IQ where he would conserve his energy for the right moments, and you thought that this was a close game, but then he knew, like you said, when to step up the effort and when not to. It's a little bit different from which shots to go for and which not. But I think this idea of load management within a game is that's who comes to mind, because he was such a genius at knowing when to exert that extra effort and when not to, not to risk injury or fatigue by playing every point with extreme effort. Obviously, that's changed now with some of the newer players that play every point like it's the last, like Nadal. But I think there is, what's the next generation? Like you think of sports. I always try to think, if I was to put my kids into professional sports, the equipment aspect, the technology aspect has been kind of optimized. We see with professional athletes now, like LeBron James investing $1 million a year on his nutrition and his health. That's been kind of optimized. So what's next? So I think it's very interesting that this new generation that you mentioned, the minor leagues are starting to incorporate neural technology into potentially making athletics even perform at a higher level. It'd be interesting to see the people that adopt these sorts of technologies, whether it be uHIT or other ways to enhance the cerebral aspect of sports. It'll be interesting to see.
They really don't have a choice in baseball right now, I think, and it's becoming less and less of a choice as the pitchers are starting to throw harder. And and so there's less and less time. I mean, I was watching a movie from 2003 recently, and they were talking about this. It takes place in Boston, and they're talking about, oh, can you imagine being up there against the guy throwing 92 miles an hour? And it's like, today there are high schoolers are throwing 92. Like 92 is kind of very middle of the road in Major League Baseball, and you're hearing about it a lot this year, as there's just less and less hitting, and it's and you're hearing about it a lot more now, the speed of the pitchers. So at some point you're going to have to use these tools, because I heard there was another documentary. One of our collaborators actually was quoted in there. It's called Fastball. The documentary is called Fastball. It's really, really good show or movie. And he talked about hitting as, the pitcher against the hitter, that matchup, it's the fastest someone can throw against the fastest somebody can decide, right? And so if you're getting faster and faster with how you throw, then the faster deciding has to catch up at some point. Otherwise, no one's going to watch because it's boring. So it's like having a neuroscience experiment that's too hard to do. And so that's something that we're kind of banking on in the long term, right? And some teams adopt things quicker than others. Some players adopt things quicker than others. But we think that this is really where things are going. And now we're at the stage of how do we fine tune the product to fit that growing need, and then how do we communicate it more? So being able to do seminars, to be able to do interviews and stuff like that are important steps. In addition to all the things like news articles and whatever else that mention this. It's important, I think, for the players and the coaches to know that it's not just like something you're born with and that's it. It's like, it is a skill that is developable, right? Some players are great at it out of the box, or some players are great at adjusting on the fly. But just because you didn't get everything about AP calculus on the first day of class doesn't mean you're not going to be great at, physics, right? So if you can fine tune, like, where are those shortcomings and what are the problems that you're seeing and recognizing pitches, we think we can help that. And so, so it's exciting to hear stories from, coaches that we've worked with at, Division 1, 2, and 3. I mean, there was a Division 2 player who's coached, he said, this guy is like a third year kind of utility player. He never was a big hitter at all. And they started using our custom training as part of a partnership program that we do, where we select colleges to have custom training free of charge for a couple of months. And he said, this guy's hitting everything. We've never seen him hit like this before. And, and it was so important to him. He kept using it on his own with us, after the partnership program. And, we'll hear stories like that, pretty consistently from parents, from coaches, for the players that buy into this. Like, the tricky part really is to get players over that hump in the beginning. And that's not so much a neuroscience problem. It's much more of a just like how people behave with new things problem, right? And but for the players that do prioritize this, do engage with it, we've been really happy with the results. And we're just hoping to be able to educate more and more people about it, so that they can get the kind of results on the field that at the end of the day they want.
That's awesome. Yeah, it goes back to your whole mission statement of just improving decision making in high stake environments. Before we kind of wrap up, I just want to touch on the other sports that you've been working with. So obviously, I guess baseball has been the main one, but has it been hard to transfer that knowledge of neuroscience and sports over to other sports away from baseball, like hockey or football or soccer?
Right. Yes and no. On the neuroscience level, it's not tremendously hard. On the practical level, it can be a challenge, right? like baseball. So we've been talking a lot about baseball. That's done by uHIT, which, it's an app you can get from the app stores, Apple or Android. For baseball, uHIT baseball. For softball, uHIT softball. And then any information on additional training, we've talked about custom training and whatnot, you can get off of our website, deCervo.com, and go to /uHIT baseball or /uHIT softball. Now, with other sports, we went out of the range of like graphic representation. So baseball, uHIT softball, it kind of looks, it's a graphical representation. So it kind of looks like a video game to some extent. And it's got all sorts of features, like, you can have like the view adapt to where your phone is pointed, stuff like that to kind of simulate VR. But we don't do that in hockey, for instance. So in hockey, it's decision making, not of players, but of the referees and linesmen. And in that case, we had to work with what the client, here it's the NHL, what the client had on hand in terms of how they teach their referees and linesmen right now. And so we had to start with videos really that they go off of to show cases of a call or a not call, right? Because sometimes it could look like it's a slashing or a hooking or something like that, but it's actually that the guy just tripped. And so we, but again, you have a go, no go, right? Blow the whistle, don't blow the whistle. And so what we had to do then is take those videos, right, that they collect and that they somewhat use as part of their curriculum and really speed up the rate at which the new officials, again, we talk about it's not the veterans, it's the new ones, right? So we work with what they call them the prospect officials in the NHL. And so these are former players who they have great skating skills, but they don't really know how to make, how to determine these calls. So we had to adapt our approach in uHIT, where it's this graphical representation, to a video-based approach, right? And video is really what's at the basis of kind of deCervo's solely owned patent, which is focused on a system for decision making, but it's based on of videos, right? So that can apply to hockey, right? We're doing that in police training right now too, and we're doing it in a couple of other areas, including tennis. And so that is allowing us to like work with the client to identify what are the relevant features of this video, because you can't really do it with machine learning or anything like that. And then we use that as the basis, like the ground truth basis, right? To know, all right, this is a slashing, this is not a slashing call. This is a hooking call, this is not a hooking call. This is when the hooking happened and where it happened on the screen. And so we use that then as ground truth to measure performance off of that. And then one thing that's neat about what we're doing in video-based apps, so hockey and police and stuff, is that we're actually made an algorithm where we were able to tag the difficulty of that particular video or sequence of things they see, and then match that to the ability of the user. So, and in such a fashion, what we're doing is actually able to, just like custom training in uHIT is using a stepwise approach on the parameters of the stimulus, we're able to use a stepwise approach based on the difficulties that have been, collected over many uses of the same video by different users, to then make a given user, continually improve his or her ability at those skills. So again, it's not we're not taking any brain measurements simultaneously with this, but we think back to how it has worked when we were able to take brain measurements simultaneously and base it off of the same kind of principles of go, no go, or visual search or something like that. So that's kind of how uCall works for the officials. We also have a uCall that was developed for Major League Baseball, as they asked us about a way of making a tool for the umpires to call balls and strikes better. We made it. It works, but the problem is that the umpires don't think they call balls and strikes that poorly. So you can only lead a horse to water, is what they say. Since then, I've found a really funny Twitter feed that talks about, it's called like bad MLB calls or something like that. And so I love seeing it because like they'll show like how many balls and strikes umpires are missing. And, and of course they think, oh, we're 100%. So, but there are still some people that download the app on their own to do that. And then there's the police side of things, which, police training has become a very hot area in the U.S., particularly in the last year. But we were doing work in this. Really, since the inception of deCervo, we thought this could apply in police training. If you want to go back and look at our first Kickstarter video, we even talk about it there. About 3 years ago now, we started a partnership with the Anchorage Police Department to work off of their dashboard cam videos. So those are cameras that are on the dashboards of cruisers that show, interactions with bad guys. And so there it was about, how quickly do they recognize certain signs of escalating or de-escalating the situation. And since then, that's really developed into a partnership we did with NYPD in New York. And we, have since then really developed eTrain to be much more, eTrain is the name of the product, to be much more of a fluid system for doing kind of like timed, choices about like what types of use of force would you use? Do you recognize signs of like this person has a weapon or they don't? And things like that to, again, use the video in such a way to hone attention towards the relevant aspects of the situation that are driven by the law, right? Not driven by your own personal bias about whether you think this guy is a lunatic or not. And so that's something that, eTrain is really driven at now. And it's all about, like treating the police officers like they're athletes, right? They're athletes who want to get better, right? So we're going with that basic assumption because we see that that's really the way police officers are for the most part. You can put aside all the weirdo stories you hear out there, but the large percentage, like 99.9% of police officers want to do their job better, just like athletes do. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to provide that tool to do that with eTrain.
Yeah, it seems like it's it could be one of the ways to measure competency, like whether it be a referee or as you said, law enforcement or armies for these kind of high stakes decisions that extend beyond sports. How do you quickly train and assess if someone has the kind of mental IQ to react the way society would deem appropriate? So that's really interesting. The number of applications this simple fundamental concept extends to. So that's exciting.
Yeah. No, it is exciting to see kind of the different directions it can go. It's a challenge on a business side to kind of manage. You don't want to be spread too thin. But from our perspective, it doesn't really matter if it's in one area or the other. We think that it can apply in all of these areas, but the ones that hit are really the ones that it really depends on some other factors that are really beyond our control in some cases. So we're just happy to provide where it's going to be the most used and be able to gauge that progress as it's as it's unfolding.
And again, one last thought from me. It's amazing to think about the data science implications if you're collecting not just the performance of people tapping go, no go, but also you can imagine if you monitor their progress, you can start predicting even without introducing certain scenarios where someone that may have challenges with fastballs and sliders may also have challenges with knuckleballs, or maybe those are mutually exclusive. So you can almost tell someone, we haven't tested your experience in this novel scenario, but usually people that are weak in this area also need some extra training in that area or whatnot. So, just coming from a data science background, I think that's a really cool way. Once you start gaining users and collecting more personalized data, seeing what kind of patterns the data points to.
Yeah. This summer we're actually we're kind of evolved the partnership program in baseball, because colleges aren't in session. They don't have a fall season. They don't have a spring season. But we're actually going to be working with a team in the in New England's college baseball league that's run by there is a optometrist who's running like kind of all their performance enhancement type stuff. And so there we're going to actually start being able to interact with, different types of data than just the usual swings and misses and, hit, batted ball trajectory type data. And so, I think as, at this point, so that's on a kind of a smaller scale. At the bigger scale, uHIT has, I don't know, 65,000 users at this point. And not all at the same time, but, we've had 65,000 users over the course of our existence. And there's millions of trials, that have been accumulated over that time. And so, and because I think we're really hitting now the challenge of engagement with the user, we're getting them to come back more frequently. So that's giving us repeated measurements over periods of time to be able to do those kinds of, trajectory analyses and, and see where people have gone with their skills. So yeah, I agree. There's definitely a big data science, opportunity there.
Amazing. Well, I'll stop asking. I can talk to you for hours. You have this perfect career in my mind. You've managed to merge neuroscience and sports. So I'm going to be forever envious of.
And I never have to go to faculty meetings either.
So I'll end it there. But Christina, any last thoughts or questions?
Not for me, but Jason, do you have anywhere you want to direct our audience to before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, sure. I think I mentioned earlier how if you're interested in the baseball or softball side, you can download the uHIT app from the App Store or Google Play. There's some more like kind of background information on how our assessment and training works on deCervo.com/uHIT baseball or uHIT softball. And for anyone on the police side of things, we did just remake our eTrain webpage. So that's deCervo.com/e-train. And so there's a lot more information there about how our basic curriculum works there and how we even customize to particular police agencies' needs. And our forthcoming tennis application came out of our custom solutions page. So if we haven't talked about an application area that you are interested in, you can contact us through that part of our webpage. It's on deCervo.com all the way at the bottom. You'll find a section for custom solutions, and you can learn more about how to get in touch with us through there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks again.
All right. Bye. Take care. Bye. Thank you.